my son, my children, they never saw the sea, they never saw a lake, they never left the boundaries of Bethlehem. They were never allowed to travel, for instance. They don't have a freedom to just walk from one place to the other.
لما بدنا نحكي عن عدالة لازم نحكي كمان عن حقوق، لأن هل الشعب الفلسطيني ما ياخذ لو جزئية بسيطة من حقوقه؟ طبعاً لا.
So speaking of justice, we also need to speak about rights, and Palestinian people didn't receive any rights. They're not granted any rights at all.
العالم بدعم مليارات من أجل الحروب.
The world seems to spend and spends millions of dollars on wars.
بس إذا بده يعمل إشي للسلام لازم يكون مشروط، وما فيش أصلاً يعني حد بدعم طرق السلام كما يجب.
So you have billions being spent on wars, but you would not have any conditions for peace. No one spends on the conditions for peace.
الاستراتيجية للعدالة لازم تكون بداية يعني إنه أول إشي ونوقف الحرب.
So a strategy for justice must be, as a first step, comprise to stop the war.
إدخال المساعدات الكافية لأهل غزة والضفة الغربية.
Allow human support and human aid to enter not only the Gaza Strip but also the West Bank.
ووقف العقابات الجماعية كمان.
And to stop collective punishment.
من ثم إيجاد حل سلمي آمن بعطي الشعب الفلسطيني حريته.
And also in the end to find a solution which would be a just solution, a peaceful solution, and a solution granting rights to Palestine, to all Palestinian people.
بالإضافة يعني وهذا خلينا نحكي في الآخر إنه إذا الشعب الفلسطيني ما أخذش حريته كل الأمور المصالحة مش رح تمشي، لأنه بالنسبة إن إحنا الحرية أولاً ومن ثم المصالحة.
So, and last but not least, to stress this point again, for us as Palestinian people, we shall not be able to reach any reconciliation without freedom, without justice. So it's freedom first, it's justice first, and then comes reconciliation.
إشراك النساء جداً مهم بالنسبة لعملية المفاوضات، لأنها بتقرب المسافات وبتخفف من وطأة الحرب، لأنه النساء بالعادة بيتعاملوا من ناحية عاطفية أكثر، فبيفكروا كثير منيح من ناحية إنه ما بدهم يفقدوا أحبابهم وأولادهم وأصحابهم وإلى آخره.
Also, it's most necessary to integrate women in any processes whatsoever. So we need women to participate in peace processes because women would allow all parties to come closer to each other. Women would also allow, they'd be more emotional, look at things more emotional, and thus they'd search for protection because they need to protect their children. Thank you very much.
Okay. So Nama, I saw you nodding vigorously. I mean, after all, you are Women Wage Peace. You have a particular focus on the role of women. And why is that role specific? Why is it unique?
Well, we believe that women have a different voice, have a different worldview, and we want to bring that to the table. We think it's missing from all negotiations all over the world, but definitely in our own private conflict, which is not private at all, of course. I completely agree with Reem with her words about justice first and reconciliation later. I truly believe that we need an agreement. We need to stop the war. We need to return the hostages. We need to end the craziness that is happening. And we need, of course, to solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But only after that we can start thinking of reconciliation. And I want to also mention something that Reem also knows, that it's a phrase that we use. We say no shaming, no blaming when we come to talk, when we come to create a dialogue between ourselves. It doesn't serve us any good to weigh who is more wrong than the other. It doesn't help us, it doesn't further us to an agreement. We've both been in the wrong, we've both been in the right. Both, I mean the peoples, the Israeli and the Palestinian. We are doing damage to each other, and we are doing damage to ourselves. And so if we want to get to a solution, in a sense, we must do exactly the opposite of what we are talking about here. We cannot look back. We have to stand here in the present and look forward and solve our problems. After that is solved, we will have ample time for reconciliation, and we will have to do it. And the dialogue that we have managed to maintain between us, even on October 7th, Reem was the first phone call that we got. She called her contacts, her friends in the movement, to ask how we are doing. So even through this terrible time, we are keeping the dialogue going. It's not easy, but it's there. And we want this to be an example of how the dialogue can continue in order to actually make an agreement that is viable and sustainable.
Whew.
Thank you.
Are there times when reconciliation is impossible? I'm just reflecting on how overwhelming it is. It seems to me that your work has become even harder, and every day it becomes harder, because the more you try to steer humanity in a particular direction, the more it goes a particular way. So perhaps let me ask that question to you, Vesna. Are there times when reconciliation is just impossible? Does it apply in all situations, everywhere, anytime?
Well, on personal level, each one should make his choices and pick his or her moments. So it's that depends what we speak about. If we actually speak about individuals reflecting on is during war for them possible at all to think about trust, or they're fully focused on suspicion? Because what war is bringing is suspicion. And as societies, I would say that especially our representatives elected should be able to think about trust building. So it's that if we speak about social and state level, then each moment should be a proper moment to look in the future, and not just to think about day after, but years after, decades after. And it's that dealing with the past, acknowledgement of what happened, it's necessary for reconciliation. But there are people who individually can reach out even without acknowledgement. They're close to saints, so we'll not expect this from everyone. And it's that maybe it would be a question for everyone. Is in your society reconciliation bad word, as we heard in South Africa? It's not a very popular word in Croatia, nor in other post-Yugoslav countries. So we usually speak about less demanding goals and processes like trust building or peace building, so that it's not assuming that people on the end of the process will reconcile individually, because people feel, okay, our suffering was not acknowledged, so we don't want to go there. We don't want to reach reconciliation. Mm-hmm. Will you give me a chance to speak one more time or not? Because if not...
Okay, so now you put me on the spot. I'm committing publicly that I will give you a chance to speak again. Is that okay?
Yes.
But If I don't do it, will you forgive me?
No, it's just that if not, I would just like to mention how important it is that when thinking about reconciliation, we have, and we know that we have, International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, and that there are still conventions to improve their work which are being considered, and I invite all of you to keep advocating for all the mechanisms like that.
Okay, I am going to come to that with the tools then that we need to use that are available at our disposal. But Nasser, I want to bring you in here as I'm listening, again, the global politics, global competition. We report on bilateral relations, trade agreements, and so on, and it all sounds like a good thing. But I'm wondering whether there are cycles of competition that bring us to these bloody confrontations with each other. And if it's not bloody confrontations, but just an inability to hear each other as we are all, or as states, try to outpace each other in their quest for power, for dominance, and so on. Given that yours is a convening of different nations, a space of dialogue, and so on, I just wonder, do we need to rethink what competition means? Do we need to rethink what shared interest means? How do we make that the way states relate to each other with a focus on shared interest rather than these cycles of competition?
Well, I guess you answered the question by posing it. Yes, the answer is yes. We live in a very complicated world where, unfortunately, some of the world global power are acting in the logic of a zero-sum game. I'm talking about the West in one side, China, and lately Russia, when it's dealing with Ukraine. And that has complicated tremendously the whole world stage and has fed into many of the conflicts that we see today, because there is no conflict today where we don't see the hands of some of those great powers, maybe in the right side of the equation and sometimes at the wrong side of the equation. But also there is a responsibility for the people in and within those situation of conflicts to try to, as much as they can, to neutralize foreign interference, to focus on what could be done to bridge the difference, on what are the shared and common interests, and what are the minimum required to build a better future. In some cases it's more difficult than others, but I'll take the case of this region, the Balkans, and the tremendous work that has been done in the last 10 and 15 years. I was in Belgrade in 1990, at the beginning of the whole tragedy, and I saw how the different narrative has led to the disaster that we saw in the ensuing years. But when I come back to the region today, it's an ongoing process. But those countries, regardless of the international community impact, has managed on their own to advance in the right direction. I see it also in other parts of the world. So, in one hand, yes, the global geopolitical scene has not been conducive, but I would not exonerate local leaders and local civil society leaders from doing their part in neutralizing any negative interference and focus on what could bring them together. We have two shining examples here from Israel and Palestine, and if we encourage those people, support them, I think we are on the right path towards justice first, and then reconciliation.
Okay, Albie, justice, reconciliation. Talk to me then about the tools that a nation, a community would need post a conflict to build a just society. I'm thinking here about South Africa specifically. We had 1994, we had the elections. That for me also stands out as the outcome, but also a tool. Free and fair elections are a tool for justice, for democracy, and so on. What are the tools?
If I may bring in themes running through my head here, how do we look at the past? How do we have shared interests? What was our experience in South Africa? Because all of these things come together. And I'm going to use the analogy of our constitutional court. We had to decide where to create this new palace, if you like, of dreams, of hope, of aspiration, of working together, of constitutionality. And we chose the site of the old Fort Prison in Johannesburg, where our leaders had been locked up. We deliberately chose that. We didn't ignore the past. And the theme was turning the swords into plowshares. So it's how you look at the past that matters. And if you look at the past with a way to reimagining things, reimagining relationships, how can we find points of commonality and shared interests? And for me, recently, a family came from Palestinians living in Israel, and he was so keen to find somebody to listen to his projection for what the country needs. He had to go to Cape Town to get a listener, and he said, one homeland, two states. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting beginning, but you must say something about the two states living side by side and together with common interests and mutual respect. And to me, the common interest is fundamental, and the common interest is in humanity. It's in working together. It's in discovering the human in the enemy, and the enemy discovering the human in you. And we did that in South Africa, and it was done the opposite of salami. The salami became a sausage, if you like. The slices came together in a whole, step by step. So it wasn't like conflict, post-conflict. It was only conflict with a little bit of talking. More and more talking, little less conflict. Hey, we can make progress. Gee, we've stopped this. Even suspending the arms struggle from our side wasn't done in one moment. It was done progressively to cache the arms so that they can't be used under ANC control. Then a neutral person came in over control, and then we forgot about the arms because they were buried somewhere, and the arms struggle stopped. So the phase, hopefully, will move from war to negotiations. Negotiations will be intense, they'll be brutal, they'll be hard. But for me, the absolutely vital thing, if I can offer advice to the Israeli side, I'm not a Zionist. I've never been a Zionist. I'm a Jew. My family were massacred in the genocide. I understand where Zionism comes from. I understand why, for many Jews, Israel is important. The Jews who understand why Israel is important should understand why a Palestinian state is important for Palestinians. That Palestinians have a right to the same pride in their state and the strength and vitality that Jews got from, as they saw it, through Zionism. So instead of the project looking to the future being one of how can we control Palestine and make sure they don't attack us, the project should be one of how can we have a strong Palestine, because that's the greatest guarantee of a surviving Israel is a strong Palestine, and a strong Palestine that shares the holy places, that shares tourism, that discovers the humanity and points of contact in the past. That is the message that to me emerges from the discussion we had. The very last point is often it's projected as a choice between peace and justice. Peace means impunity, no accountability to bring the war to the end. Justice it means sending them to jail, holding them to account. And that's a winner-takes-all, loser-loses-all approach. And negotiations, there's not going to be a winner-taking-all. Both sides have got to win. And that's where restorative justice comes in. Restorative justice is truth-telling. Restorative justice is with a view not to punishing people and segregating them from society, but to reintegrate them into society. It's used in juvenile justice quite frequently. It's got a bigger role to play in justice systems generally, and in terms of bringing peace, dealing with the atrocities in Ukraine, restorative justice will have to have a big role to play in the future. And certainly in terms of the Israel-Palestine resolution, the idea of acknowledgement is so important. It's so deep, it's so important. Acknowledgement reaches the heart in a way that punitive justice can't reach. Punitive justice is just a kind of vengeance and retribution, and we need far more thinking in those terms. And we don't have, let me say, we got a country in South Africa with all the problems that you mentioned, with a new young generation as militant and activist as we were when we were young, and challenging us as the old-fashioned constitutionalists, but we gave them a country and the ability to demand further change in a peaceful way without having to cut our throats to get the things that they want.
I do want to allow time to give you all final thoughts and still get one or two questions from the audience, but Ambassador, you were literally jumping out of your chair. What is it that you wanted to say?
When it comes to people being able to have a process of reconciliation, sometimes it's important that outside players stay out. For example, in the Balkans, when it comes to the relations between Serbia and others, or when it comes to Bosnia and Herzegovina, whenever Putin likes to spur a certain fire, he knows where he can use some tricks. So that is a problem that outsiders can come in and then re-foster fire. You mentioned the instruments, and somebody mentioned the courts in The Hague. When I was the ambassador to The Hague, I also was the ambassador to the international courts. And one new instrument of international law is the International Criminal Court, created under the Rome Statute. But mind you, some of the big powers, for obvious reasons, are not members of the Rome Statute, of that International Criminal Court. And it is the US, and it is Russia, and it is China and some others. And here we go. So they decided that they will not join that international instrument because they don't think, as great powers, that they would fall under the jurisdiction of that. And now we have seen Mr. Putin traveling to Mongolia. And they should have respected the international warrant against him. But I think Putin knew very well which of the countries which are a member of the court he can visit without running a risk. So he has chosen this visit to make sure that the international system has a problem there. And a last word, which I heard from many of my neighbors when it comes to Palestine, I think there's one thing which we, the international community, have failed to do, and that is to make sure that these settlers are put into, how should I say, into boundaries, that they accept rules and not just do justice, so to say, on their own by going into the streets and beating up on civilians. I think that really is something where we have failed. And yesterday there were comments about resolutions by the United Nations. That is also international law. And if we are failing to uphold what we see as international law, then we shouldn't be surprised that things go astray. So for me, personally speaking, what I see, and I've been there myself, what I see in treatment of the Palestinians in the West Bank and what I see from these settlers, I think this is really horrific, and we need to do better on that front. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I absolutely want to give you final 1 minute each, but then I have to do justice to this wonderful audience and ask if anyone has a question. If you do have a question, make it brief. Don't make a speech. Don't make it. You can have a statement. No, not a statement. You can make a comment. Not a statement. A comment. One comment. Not comment and question. Either or, and very, very succinct. But let's just give the floor now to Juan Arturo Sánchez, who is a keynote listener. Where's the microphone? Quick, quick, quick. You can lose a lot of time as we move along. Let's go.
Thank you very much. Esteemed members of the panel, esteemed moderator, esteemed people that are here with us, thank you very much for this. I come from Guatemala, and as a post-conflict society and post-conflict individual, myself being born 1 year after the peace treaties, this is utterly inspiring in the sense that I have been studying my country's history for the last 3 years. I still don't fully understand a lot of it, which I think is a good indicator. And I think that knowing that the historical myopia that sometimes might riddle political science, that sometimes might riddle international conversations, is not something that is actually present in everyone's mind. It's amazing to understand that the past still bears an impact and that there are people that are sensitive enough to put that into the table. I'd like to briefly state...
Very briefly, very, very.
Yeah. I'd like to briefly state or make a comment in comparison to Guatemala to something that maybe wasn't really approaching here, which is epistemic justice. And this is inspired by the great philosopher Miranda Fricker. And the idea behind this is in Guatemala, the type of results we had from the conflict we had, is that as we try to establish conditions for reconciliations, as we try to bring back bodies of disappeared people, as we try to consolidate justice for people that were raped, killed, politically disappeared in part of the second half of the 20th century, the big problem that emerges is that we are mostly haunted by what is not inside the picture. And that is the silence that prevails instrumentally to maintain political power. Political power by military elites and economical elites that were connivant during the conflict. And the ever-present influence of the communism ghost in Guatemala that not only hinders any effort of people talking about their vision of the history, but also hinders the development of social policy, hinders the development of creating the conditions to actually have juster societies, to have a situation in which I don't have to see a malnourished children again in my country, or that I see that someone is persecuted for having a pro-social approach. I apologize for my voice getting a little broken. I apologize for the time. But I would just like to conclude by saying two things. One of them is let's bear in mind that ideas matter and that there should be some responsibility in the type of dehumanizing narratives that are still being produced. And I come back to what you were saying, that focusing on the post-conflict conditions are indeed focusing in pre-conflict conditions as well. And to end, I also want to encourage you to see the conference that will be held, the one-on-one conversation that will be held with Albie Sachs and the really talented Brazilian lawyer from the ICC, Mariana Ribeiro, and might I say, a wonderful human being as well. Thank you very much for everything.
Thank you, thank you. I think we have a question. You indicated you wanted to ask a question, sir, or make a comment. Okay, no, we don't have later. We've got about 5 minutes.
Very shortly. I have the question. What you are speaking about is to understand, to change the situation by conversation, by speaking to each other. What about the fight at home? To have others on your side for that movement. For example, when I see television in Germany, where I'm coming from, I see 10,000s of people in Tel Aviv on the streets, very critical to their government and the politics of them. Is there any discussion like that also in Palestine? Maybe it's just the media which that doesn't show me.
Who's your question directed at?
To Madame Reem.
Okay, all right.
Please don't take it as a provocation. I really...
Okay, while you're thinking through those thoughts, let's take another question and then we will be wrapping up.
Thank you very much. I just make it brief then. My name is Nozipo. I'm also part of the Global Diplomacy Lab. I wanted to touch maybe on the challenge that we got and build on the challenge, but also building dehumanized narratives. As young people, I think part of tools of reconciliation are not accessible to us because they are stuck in judicial systems, policies, and structures that don't really work for the generation we are kind of trying to learn from the past but build for the future. And so the challenge is to the panel, sorry for pointing, the challenge is really to the panel to ask, to find ways of bridging with young people that are accessible to us, right? We live in an evolving digital technical world with technocrats developing data that is going to be used to define what truth is, who is the victor, who is the victim. And so we would like to have that bridge. To make it very short, what advice would you give us that is practical, that is implementable in your working experiences, right? Because, for example, in Kenya, young people have taken a stand using technology to kind of push. So we have the power, we have the capacity to develop the soft vengeance that is being talked about. But sometimes it's so inaccessible that we need this bridge to kind of connect from past, future to present, which is what we're living all together right now, which is the shared parallel reality. Thank you.
You know, Nozipo, I suspect that the panelists would like your advice on how to use the digital this and that. Okay, would you like to address the question that was asked?
بالنسبة إحنا كنساء فلسطينيات إحنا كنا نناشد العالم قبل 7 أكتوبر إنه في بركان ثائر في المنطقة رح ينفجر بأي لحظة.
We, being Palestinian women, and let me answer your question, being Palestinian women, we used to call out to the world long before October the 7th that there is an explosion, that the world is about to explode.
عملياً ما كانت الحرب بدايتها 7 أكتوبر.
So there was a volcano about to explode, and I think that the war didn't start with October the 7th.
قبل الحرب بيومين فقط كنا عاملين مسيرة ضخمة جداً ابتدأت من بيت لحم للقدس كانت نهايتها في البحر الميت.
2 days before October the 7th, we had a demonstration. It took us from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, to East Jerusalem, and to the Dead Sea.
جمعت آلاف من النساء الفلسطينيات والإسرائيليات ونساء من نحو العالم شاركونا في هذا الحدث الكبير.
Many women, thousands of women from around the world came and joined our walk, our march. Also, Palestinian women joined, Israeli women joined.
طلبنا العالم فيه أنه يوقفوا إراقة الدماء.
We asked the world back then, that is these 2 days before October the 7th, we asked the world to stop the shedding of blood.
لأن كنا متأكدين إنه راح يتفاقم الوضع أكثر من هيك.
Because we were sure back then that the situation was about to explode.
بعد 7 أكتوبر لما تفاقم الوضع وبالنسبة للعالم إسرائيل أكلت الضربة الأولى.
After the 7th of October, after the situation deteriorated and Israel had its first attack,
انتبه العالم إنه القضية الفلسطينية الإسرائيلية لساتها موجودة على محور الطاولة.
all of a sudden, the world became aware that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict was still there.
وأنه هم يحاولوا إنهم يعموا عيونهم عنا فترة طويلة لكن الحقيقة إنها ظهرت مرة أخرى.
Well, the world for many years tried to look away, tried to close its eyes, and now all of a sudden it became aware that the problem was still there.
بناء الثقة بيننا وبين الجانب الآخر من نساء يصنعن السلام كان موجود عشان هيك احنا ما تأثرنا بعد 7 أكتوبر.
But the trust we had built before the 7th of October was still there, the trust we had built as women of the sun with Women Wage Peace.
Okay. All right, so you have, 1 minute. It's your closing comment as well, right? Sure.
I'm not making a closing comment, but just to come back to the question and give you a straightforward answer, because you were talking about dissent within the Israeli society, albeit very limited, unfortunately. There is dissent within the Palestinian society. Rashid al-Khaldi, who was running one of the most reliable polling projects, his continuous polling throughout the crisis and even before is showing very clearly that the majority of the Palestinian people do not support the current Palestinian Authority, neither they support Hamas, although at a certain time there were a blip after October the 7th, but the underlying, the results are clearly showing there is a huge dissatisfaction with the political elite in Palestine.
Yes.
I'm just giving you a straightforward answer.
Sorry, I wonder if I can also take advantage of that. I'm wearing my journalism hat now. There was a protest actually by Gazan children in January outside a hospital, and they were asking Hamas to release the hostages because they wanted peace. That was a protest that was broadcast on Al Jazeera. Furthermore, in the years that I've been working in international media, I've spoken to activists in Palestine who reject Hamas. That's why that they were ruling the Gaza Strip and not the rest of the territory, because they are rejected. And we know that they haven't held elections there. If they were to hold elections, it would be a different outcome. But the activists and the journalists also speak of their activism and the restrictions that they suffer under Hamas. I thought that was important. Okay, this is what we're going to do. I've got 3 minutes. 3 minutes, closing comment in half a second. Who's going to go first? I'm not pointing at anyone. Let's go.
For youth, the most important thing lies with survivors and the ones who resist violence. Research, work with them, create a culture of remembrance which might become part of identity and political education. So it's that, record their words, work with them on what they need to resist violence and what they need to keep surviving and develop steps towards reconciliation.
Final comment.
Okay, I would like to remind us all that conflicts are very rarely a zero-sum game. And we have to bear that in mind when we want to support both parties that are trying to arrive at a solution. So I would really ask you all to keep that in mind whenever you're thinking of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We both want it to end, and we need our voices amplified, the voices of peace in both sides.
Ambassador Dirk, last thought?
Maybe naive, but I think what we really need now is that we find a peaceful solution to both the conflicts between Israel and Palestine and Russia and Ukraine, because these conflicts take up so much of political oxygen that everything else is falling by the wayside. And the longer that goes, the more damage will be done to the international system. And the multilateral system is under siege, as I said. But if this goes on longer and longer and longer, the risks are getting even higher. So I'm focusing on that and leave it at that. Thank you.
Reem, final thought, and I'm coming to you next, Mr. Nasser Kamel, and then Albie Sachs. Yep. 1 minute, half a minute.
ساعدونا في إيقاف الحرب، ساعدونا في إحلال السلام، أوقفوا دعم طرف على طرف آخر، لأنه هذا الإشي بزيد الكراهية والحقد بيناتنا. شكرا.
Please kindly help us to stop the war, kindly help us to build peace, also kindly help us to not point the finger of accusation to the other, but to stop that. because otherwise we shall not be able to find justice, to find peace, to find freedom and reconciliation. Thank you.
Nasser, Kamel.
Well, maybe I will divert from the subject. I will refer to what the Prime Minister of Slovenia mentioned yesterday regarding his very honorable position by recognizing Palestine. He mentioned double standards. It's very important, especially here in Europe, that we realize that the Global South will not be convinced on the justice and the merits of supporting Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is very important, unless there is the same standard being applied to what's happening today in Palestine. Thank you.
Thank you. Final thoughts, Albie Sachs?
Just to say thank you to the women on the panel and the point that's been made. It's no accident that the second woman judge in South Africa, the first woman on our court, Yvonne Mogoro, brought with her the concept of Ubuntu onto the court. Ubuntu is I'm a person because you're a person. Ubuntu focuses on relationships, not on individual rights, but connections between people. Ubuntu sees autonomy being strengthened by acknowledging your position together with the others. It's helped to transform our legal thinking, and we need much more Ubuntu in our political thinking and in our thinking about justice.
Thank you so much to my esteemed panelists. For your work, your heart, your thoughts, for bringing us into your lives through the work that you do and your hopes for humanity. Thank you. And to our wonderful audience, thank you very much indeed.